Hi everyone, this is Alistair. A couple of quick notices before we begin. First off, just to let you know, pet mortality and general mortality of the vulnerable is a major part of this story. If that's an issue you would rather not hear explored, please do what you need to do to feel comfortable, and we will catch you next time. And secondly, I would like to apologise to one of our recent narrators, whose name I pronounced pretty far from correctly. That's a situation which I've had myself a few times, and it's never very good. So, as means of recompense, without further ado, I would like to welcome you to this episode of PseudoPod. PseudoPod, or is that SuedePod? Episode 877, August 4th, 2023. We know. This week's story, Billy's Garage by Richard Dansky. Hey everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week's story, audio produced by the amazing Chelsea, is from Richard Dansky. Richard is a 20-year-plus veteran of the video game industry, currently working on Hunt Showdown. He has published 8 novels, most recently Ghost of a Marriage. His most recent book is the short fiction collection A Meeting in the Devil's House and Other Stories, and Alex will be along in the end cap to talk to you about that a little bit. Prior to working in video games, he was a key contributor to White Wolf's classic World of Darkness setting, and a major influence on the writer and game designer and narrative designer I am today. One of the books I read until the pages fell out was Wraith the Oblivion, which was one of Richard's leading projects. Thank you for that, sir. You are a big part of why I'm here. Richard lives in North Carolina with 2 cats who tolerate each other, a lot of books, and a lot of scotch. As I say, Richard is one of my favourite writers and creators, and it's an honour to host this story. You can and should find his socials in the show notes. Your narrator this week is our own Brian Lieberman, whose two-fisted engineering skills and extraordinarily amenable social presence are big parts of the foundations of the EA Foundation. We're honoured to have you with us. Thanks, buddy. Now, get ready, because the weird kid has something to tell you. And we promise you, it's true.
Billy's Garage by Richard Dansky. Narrated by Brian Lieberman. Billy was a weird kid. I don't mean he was weird in the sense that he liked role-playing games or heavy metal or anything like that. He wasn't really into it anyway, and the kids who were, well, they were only nerds of one stripe or another. Instead, he was just kind of creepy. When you talked to him, you got the feeling he was focusing on a point about an inch inside your skull, instead of making eye contact. He talked about weird stuff, too, if you could get him to talk, which wasn't often. Mostly he kept to himself, and mostly the rest of us liked it that way. But I drew Billy as a lab partner in biology, which meant that he and I had to talk on a regular basis, and I guess that got him thinking we were friends. We weren't, but I at least tolerated his conversation, which made me closer to him than anyone else. One day we were supposed to dissect frogs. A bunch of kids in the class begged off, claiming it was against their religion or something when really they were just afraid it was going to be gross. But not Billy. He was totally into it. At least until the dried-out frog carcass we were supposed to take apart landed in front of us. "Shit," he said. "Watch the language in front of Miss Stamper," I said. "She'll send you to detention." "Oops," he said, and then, "Thanks." He prodded the frog with the scalpel we'd been provided with. The frog, being long dead, did not react. "It's a shame," he said. "All these frogs have been dead for ages. They're dried out. Their ghosts are gone." "Ghosts? Frog ghosts?" I said and laughed. Then I saw the look Billy was shooting me, and I stopped laughing. "Don't tell me you believe in frog ghosts." Billy nodded solemnly. "Everything living's got a ghost in it," he said. "Most of them don't last long, but there's all sorts of ghosts out there, not just people ghosts." "Gentlemen?" That was Mrs. Stamper, the biology teacher, a no-nonsense type with no patience for chit-chat when there were frogs to dissect. "I'm sure your discussion is fascinating, but we have work to do and less than a period to do it in. So if you'll allow me..." She trailed off into silence, leaving no doubt as to whether or not we were going to allow her anything she damn well pleased. "Yes, ma'am," we said in unison. Then Billy turned to the frog to await instructions on which incision to make. "Tell you what," he whispered. "After school, come over my place and I'll show you." "Show me frog ghosts?" I said, disbelieving. "Something better than that," he said. And then Mrs. Stamper was announcing instructions, and Billy bent to the task of following them. After school, Billy was waiting for me by the bike rack. "Hey, Billy," I said, uncomfortably aware of the eyes of the other kids on me, judging me a weirdo for talking to the weird kid. "Hey, Steve," he said. "You gonna come over this afternoon like we talked about in class?" I looked around. The other kids were already drawing away from me. I'd been tainted with weirdness, and there was no way to escape it. "Sure," I said. "You got a bike?" "Sure do," he said, and pointed to a battered Huffy 3-speed. I had a newer model, a 12-speed my parents had gotten me for Christmas, with the unspoken warning that it was going to be all the transportation I got from them for a good long while. "Okay," I said, and took the kryptonite lock off my bike as he unchained his. Then he set off at a pace I could easily follow. We dodged the juniors and seniors in their cars and headed out toward wherever Billy called home. We rode for a couple miles, making turns at regular intervals until he finally pulled into the driveway of a respectable-looking ranch house with a beat-up Volvo station wagon in the driveway. This kind of took me by surprise. I had no idea where Billy might live, but I never expected it to be somewhere so ordinary. But before I could say anything, he was walking his bike up the drive and beckoning me to follow him. He parked the bike beside the kitchen door. I put my bike next to his and followed him in. "Hi, Mom," he said as we walked in. "This is Steve. We have biology class together." "Hello, Steve." His mother, an attractive woman with brown curly hair, wearing mom jeans and a dark red blouse, waved us in. "It's so nice of you to come. Billy so rarely has friends over." The kitchen looked normal. Again, I didn't know what I was expecting, but normal was not it. The walls were painted light yellow, and there were decorative plates mounted on the walls. A bouquet of tulips sat in a vase on the kitchen table. Happy to," I managed to say. Thank you for having me over." "It's our pleasure," she said. "Can I get you boys a snack?" "No thanks, Mom," Billy said, disappointing me because I really did want a snack. "We dissected frogs today in class, so neither of us are hungry." Billy's mom got a pained look on her face. "Oh, Billy," she said, "don't tell me you brought Steve here to see the collection." "Well," Billy said and came up short. "Kind of," he finally admitted. "You will do no such thing," Billy's mom instructed him. "Now have a good time hanging out, and if you want anything, you let me know." With that, she turned back to the sink, where she was preparing some kind of vegetable, presumably for dinner. Billy escaped from the kitchen, and I followed him to his room, which was down the hall and on the left. It was decorated with a couple of band posters from acts I'd never heard of, and the walls were painted blue. Kind of weird, but not really. He had a dresser and a desk and a bed in there, and a stack of comic book long boxes. "You read comics?" he asked. "I used to," I admitted. "Haven't in a while." "You can borrow anything you want from my collection," he said, and gestured to the long boxes. "Gee, thanks, Billy," I said, and I meant it. It was a genuinely nice gesture, even if he was a weird kid and I wasn't likely to take him up on it. "Was that the collection your mom said you couldn't show me?" Billy shook his head. "No, that's out in the garage. I'll show it to you another time, I guess. Do you really want to see it?" he asked. "I want to know what you meant by frog ghosts back in the class. If you got a box of ghost frogs out in the garage, I'd totally be into seeing that." Much to my surprise, I was serious. "Not frogs," he mumbled. "Something else." Then he perked up. "But seriously, one day I'll get to show you, and you'll see it, and you'll believe me." "Show me what?" I asked. "Come on, you gotta tell me." He sighed. "All right, but you can't tell anyone." "I won't," I said. "You swear?" "I swear." "Okay." He leaned back, less intense. "The thing is, like I told you, everything can have a ghost. People, dogs, cats, everything." "Even bacteria and stuff?" I asked, snarkier than I intended. Dunno. Never looked for them, he replied seriously. The thing is, I can see ghosts. All of them. Animals and people. There's a ghost janitor in our school. I talk to him sometimes. It makes him happy. I flashed back to one of the things that made Billy so weird. The fact that some kids had caught him supposedly talking to himself in a corner by the janitorial closet. Now it made sense, if I believed him. I mustered a weird and then prodded for more information. So why isn't the world filled with ghosts? He shrugged. Near as I can tell, if ghosts don't get attention, they fade away. That's why we aren't swimming in dinosaur ghosts or woolly mammoth ghosts or whatever. They all just drift off after a while. It's kind of my mission to keep them from drifting off if I can. Some of them, anyway. He looked at me sideways. You think I'm crazy, don't you? No, I managed. I just never thought about any of this stuff before, which was true enough as it went. Huh, Billy said. I'm sorry, I don't want to weird you out, but it feels so good to talk about it with someone. Thank you, Steve. You're welcome, I said. So your collection is ghosts? Billy looked around conspiratorially, as if to make sure his mom wasn't listening. Sort of. A special kind of ghost. Oh? He nodded. You know Palmer Lake? Sure. Everyone knew Palmer Lake. It was where the older kids would drive to in the evening to make out in their cars. Those of us with bicycles could only gaze on with awe and envy. Well, there's the main landing, and then there's a smaller one over on Logan Road, and people go to that second landing to do something terrible. Human sacrifice? I asked, only mostly kidding. We had an assembly program about satanic cults at school a few months back, which we had mostly laughed through. The best part was when they had showed us a slide of a supposed satanic altar where someone had spray painted the words, Satan rules. Billy shook his head. Worse. That's where people go to drown kittens. What? I wasn't sure which was more shocking, the idea of someone drowning a kitten or the fact that Billy considered it worse than human sacrifice. I'm serious, man, Billy said. People don't get their cats spayed. They wind up with a load of kittens they can't handle, so they put them in a sack and they go out to Palmer Lake to drown them. That's sick, I said. Killing kittens like that? Billy nodded in agreement. The thing is, you can't really stop people from doing it. I mean, I can't hang out at Palmer Lake all night, and it's not like people would listen to me if I try to get them to stop. So I do what I can. You come for the ghosts of the kittens, I said, realization dawning. You bring the ghosts home, and that's your collection. All they need is a little love, but Mom says I have to keep them in the garage, and I can't share them with anybody, Billy said, and he sounded heartbroken. Don't tell anyone I told you this, okay? Sure thing, I said. I won't tell a soul. Which was true because it sounded crazy, and I didn't want the other kids to think I was weird like Billy. But the whole thing nagged at me. Did Billy really believe he had ghost kittens in his garage? I had to find out, just for my own curiosity. I mean, I didn't really think he had a ghost collection, but he clearly thought he did, and so did his mom, and that made me curious. So I decided, why the hell not? And I decided to ask him. He must have noticed I was distracted, and he poked me. Hey, you still there? I gave a quick grin. Yeah, you know, that collection of yours actually seems really cool. Why doesn't your mom want you to show it to me? Billy shrugged. I don't know. Most people I showed it to didn't take it real well. One of them threw up. A couple of them ran. I guess Mom just didn't want me to lose another friend. But I want to see it, I said. And ghost kittens sound cute, not scary. If you show it to me, I promise not to freak out. He perked up at that. Really? Cross my heart. And I was serious. I did want to see it, and I didn't think I was going to freak out when I did. Where was the harm, right? Taking a deep breath, Billy came to a decision. Okay, I'll show it to you. But we got to be careful or I'll get in trouble. Mom can't know we're doing this. Gotcha, I nodded. So what do we do? Follow me, Billy said, and be quiet. He eased his door open, stepped out into the hallway, and gestured me to come with him. I waited for a second for his mom to come thundering down the hall, and when she didn't, I followed. Billy made exaggerated sneaking steps as he went, putting each foot down carefully. I didn't quite match him, but I tried to be quiet, and after a minute and a turn, we were at the interior door that led to the garage. You have to be quiet if you want to hear them, Billy said in a stage whisper. They don't make a lot of noise. I nodded, and he opened the door so we could step inside. It was a garage, just like any other garage. At least that was my first thought. I could see boxes and a ladder on its side and tool rack and pretty much what you'd expect in a suburban garage. It was dim in there with only a little light filtering in from the door we'd walked through, and I was about to ask Billy to turn the lights on when he pointed and said, "There." I looked at the corner he was pointing to. At first I didn't see anything. Then the dim outlines of a sack from one of the local big box stores appeared, translucent in the dim light. I caught my breath, not daring to breathe, and then I heard it. The mewling. The pitiful, pained mewling. Faint at first, but then louder as my ears grew accustomed to it. And as I looked, I could see the sack squirming like it was alive. A kitten face popped out the top, eyes barely open, ears folded down. It was followed by another one, then another. I took a step back, and as I did, I looked away. Big mistake, because now wherever I looked, I saw another sack of dead kittens, crying out for something I couldn't give them. You see them, don't you? That was Billy, his voice unreasonably loud after all the soft, wet kitten noises. Shh, kitties. Billy's here. He walked over to one of the sacks and petted the phantom kitten trying to crawl out of it. It squealed and climbed back into the sack, eliciting a chorus of responses from its brethren. He repeated this with each of the collections of kittens. Not one seemed glad to see him. Me, I just stood there with my mouth hanging open. Eventually, Billy looked up at me. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Just a lot to take in. I mean, it's real. I told you, he said. Do you believe me now? About the frog ghosts and everything? I believe you, I breathed. Can we go now? You're not going to freak out, are you? He looked worried. I shook my head. I said I wouldn't, just, wow, it's a lot. Billy nodded and gave the kittens he was near one last pat. Then he straightened up and led me out of the garage, back to his room. I walked in, head still spinning, and he shut the door behind me. So, what did you think? He asked. It was amazing, I said, which was true. I was amazed that what he said was true and that he did have a collection of kitten ghosts in his garage. But I was also horrified, not that I could let it show. I was no expert on cats, but those ghosts did not sound happy. The idea of being trapped forever in Billy's garage, half blind and barely able to crawl, dripping wet for all eternity, was monstrous. Billy didn't see it that way, though. From his perspective, he was rescuing these kittens from oblivion, fading away unremembered and unloved. Was that wrong? I thought about it for a second. Yeah, if what I saw in the garage was the result, then it was wrong. If you noticed my hesitation, Billy didn't give any indication. It's really cool that you could see it without going apeshit. I've lost a lot of friends that way over the years. Till you came along, I'd pretty much given up. Inside, I winced at the guilt trip Billy was laying on me. Outside, I played it cool. I told you I was going to be cool with it, and I won't tell anyone, I promise. That part was definitely true. Who would believe me? Thanks, Billy said. I knew I could trust you. Sure, I said. Now, you said something about comics? I stayed a couple more hours at Billy's before it was supper time, and I excused myself. Mucking around in Billy's comics collection had actually been pretty cool, but I just couldn't shake what I had seen in the garage. I wouldn't be going back to Billy's anymore, I decided, and I'd asked Mrs. Stamper for a new lab partner. I was pretty sure ghost kittens were against my religion, particularly sacks of drowned ones lined up in a row. Enough of the weird, it was time to get back to normal, and that started with riding home from Billy's as fast as possible. A turn, and I realized I was on Logan Road, and there it was, the turnoff to Palmer Lake, a sign barely visible through overgrown shrubbery. The sky was getting dark and I needed to be getting home, but for some reason, I turned into the driveway that led to the parking area by the lake shore. It wasn't much of a lake, more of a pond, really. There was a Chevy Cavalier pulled into the gravel parking lot, and I could see a couple of guys arguing back and forth across the hood. I decided to stay far away and looped around to the far end of the lot. Then I walked my bike down to the water's edge and stared in. Nothing stared back. A heron flew overhead, making weird dinosaur noises as it went, and somewhere out in the water a turtle slipped off a rock, but that was about it. And then I heard the two guys coming down to the water. "This is stupid," one of them said. "Just take him to the shelter." "Shelter's just going to put him to sleep anyway," said the other, who was taller, bearded, and carrying a sack. I looked at the sack for a moment. It was squirming. "Oh no," I said. "Dude, you're asking me to help you drown kittens." The first guy, who was skinny and wearing a jeans jacket with the WHO logo painted on the back, was distraught. "You don't have to help. Just get out of my way, Sam," the taller man said. "Hey," I said, much to my surprise. "What are you guys doing?" I started walking towards them. "Nothing," said Sam. And "None of your business," said his friend. "What's in the sack?" I asked, coming closer. "Nothing," said Sam, and "None of your business," said his friend. The two of them looked at each other, then looked at me, then took a step forward. "Listen, kid," the tall one said. "Do yourself a favor and ride your bike on out of here. What's going on is none of your business." "You're going to drown a bag of kittens, aren't you?" I said. "I didn't think people actually did that, but you're really going to." "You're a monster." I mustered all of my self-righteous indignation and pointed at the sack. "I'm not going to let you do that." "You're not going to stop me," the tall man said. "I can report you to the police," I said. "I've got your license plate number." I didn't, actually, but they didn't know that. Sam, the short guy, came forward. "Listen, kid, there's no need to bring the cops into this. These kittens don't have a home and the shelter can't take them. It's a mercy what Tony's doing." "I heard you," I said accusingly. "You didn't even try the shelter." Sam held his hands up. "Shit, Tony," he said. "You got any ideas?" "One," he said, and came towards me. "Listen, punk, you got two choices. You can leave right now and forget you saw anything, or I can kick your ass and send you crying home to your mommy. Either way, I'm going to do what I have to do. You understand?" "Give me the kittens," I said, and reached for the sack. "Fuck off," Tony said, and shoved me hard in the middle of my chest. I went backwards a step and my heel slipped on some mud. Next thing I knew, I was falling, and then there was an explosion of pain as my head hit a rock at the water's edge. "Oh, shit," Sam said. "What did you do, Tony?" "It was an accident, I swear. I just meant to scare the kid, and he fell and hit his head on that rock." "That's a lot of blood," Sam observed. "Help me pick him up." "Are you kidding?" Tony asked. "He was going to call the cops over a bunch of kittens. What's he going to do now that I did this to him?" "No way, man. Can't do it." Sam was frantic. "We can't just leave him here." "We're not going to just leave him," Tony said ominously. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. The blood streaming down the side of my head was a warm flood, and I knew I was in serious trouble. Then Tony was kneeling down next to me, his hands cradling my head. "Shh," he said. "It'll be easier that way." "Tony, no," Sam yelped. "Shut up, Sam," Tony answered and shoved my face into the water. I struggled, but it didn't do any good. I tried to hold my breath, but the pain from my head was like a knife, and too soon my lungs were desperate for air. Then I breathed in my first mouthful of water, and everything went red, and then black. The last thing I remembered was a splash next to me, and faint mewling as a sack filled with water. I woke up in a vaguely familiar-looking garage, unable to feel my hands or feet or anything else, really. It was cold, so cold, and the air around me was filled with the soft sounds of kittens. I looked around, and there was Billy. "Hi, Steve," he said, cradling a ghost kitten in his hands. So about the collection, guess you're a part of it now.
Richard left this note for us. This is my contribution to the Kids on Bikes subgenre of horror. It's set back when I was a teen, and yes, we did have to dissect actual frogs. Incidentally, the author in no way condones any of the actions depicted in this story, except for reading comic books. And now, here's Alex with a review of Richard's brilliant recent short fiction anthology.
Richard Dansky is one of the major contributors of why I am an editor at PseudoPod. Around 2006, my friends Ben Phillips and Jonathan Chaffin started working on this thing on the internet. At the time, a lot of my friends were doing things on the internet, so I smiled and encouraged them to do things that made them happy and went about my days. A few years later, I worked out a mechanism that would support me listening to that thing that they were working on called a podcast, and a significant number of hours in a vehicle that would support listening. There was a lot of really fun stuff, and I was delighted to ease back into reading after college completely destroyed my love for that activity. The first year of content helped heal my soul, and then, episode 64 pinned my ears back. Maybe I was susceptible due to a recent trip where I had suffered through the wretched powerlessness of a hotel stay. This story, Connecting Door, reveals the slow dissolution of one man who just needs to get rest before work in the morning. The paper-thin walls and rude neighbors slowly erode his humanity. To this day, whenever I get a room with a connecting door, I hear the mutterings, fuck, from that portal. Do yourself a favor and enjoy the delightful audio production that really takes that story to a new level. After that, I started harassing Ben to let me help out and get involved. And I haven't left. Maybe I'm trapped behind that connecting door too. Fuck. That story was collected in Snowbird Gothic, which is also worth your time to seek out. Dansky's newest collection out this month, A Meeting in the Devil's House, is even better. The devil is a recurring theme here, whether it's the Prince of Lies himself, a shadow of him, or personal demons that ride you and drive your actions. Beer and Pennies is a lighter meeting with the devil to disarm the reader and sting him with the slow-acting poison, which spreads more deeply as the reader continues. Wishing Won't lands a brutal punch to the disarmed and lets us know we're in for a journey. I could lavish praise on every title in this book, but instead I will point you to sample what's in this book by checking out Licking Roadkill and On Seas of Blood and Salt from our catalog in late 2021. With regards to the latter, I absolutely love the character Reb Palash. In this collection, we get the current 3 extant stories, the 39th labor of Reb Palash and the Dybbuk, and On Seas of Blood and Salt. I first encountered Palash in the anthology The Jewish Book of Horror, with the 3rd, so I was delighted to see the other 2 stories contained within this collection. They all contain sorrow and redemption, magic, and gore. They avoid violence when possible, but fight back when the circumstances are dire. The world needs more examples of heroism through non-violent means. The best other example I can think of is the modern incarnation of Squirrel Girl, who does everything with her power to tackle challenges with the power of friendship and non-violent intervention, but she will show up to eat nuts and kick butts if required. If you haven't read those, there's a ton of excellent 6-issue compilations of all of them, and I recommend that you read them through your local library. Libraries still buy the books, which pays creatives. Requesting unavailable titles from your local system gets them considered for purchase, which makes them available for more people to read. Checking those out from a library keeps them in circulation. All of these activities let the bookkeepers know what to make more of. If you need a little hope in your life right now, that's a great place to do it. And if anybody from Marvel's listening to this, please pick up the phone and call Mr. Dansky to do a run of Squirrel Girl. And after you buy yourself a copy of A Meeting in the Devil's House by Richard Dansky, request that your local library stock a copy too. Then request 3 more books that they need to have on their shelves. Blame me for flooding their request forms. Or just say the devil made you do it.
Thank you, Alex. And now me. We did the frogs too. And we also had one of these spots. I can never quite remember whether my best friend at school or his brother made it into the local paper for saving a bag of kittens from this exact fate at our version of this exact spot. I do know where the spot is. It's the old quarry at the far end of the island, the one that was notionally deserted, but that our cross-country running route used, and as far as I know still does use, as an endpoint. The one with a very, very deep water table, and at least one car in it. The end of the line, one of those places where everything feels like a boundary, and that boundary sometimes feels entirely too thin. The quarry, it turns out, is where the limestone that built Castletown — we have a castle, it's a town, it's a good castle too — was mined, and the quarry is still there, and so is the castle. The quarry's been cleaned up a little bit recently. It's fractionally less murdery, and there's a nature centre on the hill above it now that proudly declares it sits between the quarry where the limestone that made Castletown was mined and the limestone kilns. Like I say, places between places, boundaries getting thin, terrible or desperate or bored people doing terrible things in the hole history was dug out of. You change. Your surroundings don't. The only thing you can do is cling on all the harder. But what Dansky does here that's haunting is look at that desperate grasp on history from a different perspective. Remembrance is compassion, but remembrance can also be penance, and worse, imprisonment. You calcify, your one job becoming to remember everything that's gone, everyone that's gone. You hold the future in your hands so tight it becomes set in stone, and so do you. And your only response is to complain how things aren't how they used to be, and cling all the harder, not letting yourself feel the past you built on crumble in your grasp. My friend who saved the kittens, and his brother, are no longer with us. We used to meet up every year to remember him, travelling from across the country to do so. Some of us still do, I think. All of us remember, but none of us cling on anymore. Instead, we hold the past carefully, and we do our best to make something better around, not keep something the same because of it. Remembrance as foundation, not as imprisonment. Remembrance as the beginning of a new story, not every act of an old one, yet again. I like that. I would like to think one day Billy would too. Thanks everyone. I really liked this one. You might be able to tell. We're an independent production, and we are entirely powered by you. We rely on you to pay our authors, staff, and cover our costs. There is a recession, there is a pandemic, and yet here we are, making art for you, something we can only do if you help us. We have PayPal and Patreon subscriptions that start at $5 a month. Both get you access to our audio archive. The Patreon subscription tiers get you all sorts of goodies at the higher levels. And please, help out if you can. It's always needed. And also, if you are already a Patreon subscriber, firstly, thank you. And secondly, at time of recording, we're at 3 days out from Patreon arbitrarily changing where their payment center was located without telling anybody. And this has caused a raft of payment cancellations across a lot of people's accounts, and we've seen some of this too. So, if you do back us, please, if you could make sure you still back us, and if you're able to resubscribe, that would be great. Thank you. If you can't help financially, we understand completely, and so please consider talking about us instead. It helps a lot too, more than you might think. If you liked an episode, please link to it on whatever social media platform is launching to save Twitter this hour, or blog about it, or leave a review on your podcatcher of choice. It all helps. And as long as you help, we can keep doing this. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. PseudoPod returns next week with episode 878, a double bill of Horatio Quiroga stories. The Sun, El Hijo, and The Feather Pillow, El Almohadón de Plumas. Diogo Ramos narrates for us, Chelsea's on production, and I will be your host. We'll see you then, but first, PseudoPod wants to remind you they will find him, but not the way they want to.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.